Hello everybody, my name is Grace, and today we will continue the book Who Was Alexander the Great? Chapter 6, King of Persia. Darius had fled to Ecbatana. It was the only great city of the Persian Empire that was not in Alexander's hands. In the early summer of 330 BC, Alexander marched from Persepolis to Ecbatana. What did Darius do? He fled farther east. He decided to gather an army what is now Afghanistan. He would make his last stand there, among the green valleys and snowy mountains. Alexander did not give up the chase. The closer he got to Darius, the more frightened the Persians came. In the end, the Persians killed their king. That was often the ancient Persian way with kings who failed at war. His cousin made himself king instead. But Alexander soon hunted him down and killed him. It took Alexander more than 2 years to conquer Afghanistan. Afterward, many of his men expected to go home. Alexander had taken over the Persian Empire. Wasn't that what he came for? The job was finished, the men grumbled. But Alexander made them keep going. He wanted to conquer more lands. He wanted to be the greatest conqueror in the world. Some of Alexander's junior officers plotted to murder him. The son of Parmenion heard about his plot. His name was Theodostas. He didn't think the officers were serious, so he said nothing to Alexander. There was a mistake. Alexander found out the plot. He also found that Theodostas knew about it. Why had Theodostas said nothing? Alexander was convinced that Theodostas was one of the plotters. The young man was tortured and killed. After that, Alexander believed that he could not trust Parmenion either. He had the old general killed as well. Most of Alexander's senior officers thought that he was right to do this, but the ordinary soldiers didn't understand. They disapproved. Why were some of Alexander's men turning against him? Maybe it was because of Alexander's starting to act like a Persian king. Alexander's men looked down on the Persians, but Alexander seemed to be like them. He often dressed like a Persian king. Alexander even had Persian friends in his court now. The great king of Persia. Like all the riches of the Persian Empire once belonged to Darius. Like all Persian kings, he wore his hair oiled and curled. He had a very stiff beard. He dressed in only the finest gold, made of silk and woven with gold thread. Persians wore trousers, unlike Macedonians or Greeks, but the king wore a magnificent robe. Jeweled rings glittered on his fingers. He wore a crown and held a golden scepter in his right hand. He sat on a carved golden throne. Ordinary people could not speak to him directly. A message was given to one of the king's friends, and he passed it on. In every way, the Persian king was special. The Persians believed that he had been chosen by the gods. The king was almost a god himself, but he couldn't rule such a big empire alone. The empire was divided into 20 countries. Each country was called a satrapy and ruled by a satrap. Satraps were like lesser kings to the great king. That is why every Persian king was called the King of Kings. Alexander behaved like this for a reason. He was the head of a huge empire. To rule it, he needed the help of Persians as well as Macedonians. He had to be king for both Macedonians and for Persians, and even a pharaoh for Egyptians. Not all his men understood this, but Alexander was the king. He did not let his men tell how to behave. Now Alexander sat on a golden throne. His huge tent had gold everywhere. Even the tent poles were golden. Inside the tent, he was surrounded by Persian and Macedonian guards. Outside his tent was guarded by elephants dressed for battle. Persians bowed down before Alexander. They had always bowed for the great king. Alexander now ordered all his men to bow before him. But Greeks and Macedonians had only bowed before their gods. Some of them refused to obey. To them, it seemed that all his wealth and power had changed Alexander. In the old days, any Macedonian nobleman could speak his mind to his king. Now it became dangerous to do that. Alexander did not want to hear that he was wrong about anything. One night, Alexander threw a party for the senior Macedonian officers. His friend Clytus came. He was the man who had saved the king's life at the Ganges River. A lot of wine was drunk. Alexander began to brag about his success. This did not go down well with Clytus. Clytus said that Alexander was too high and mighty. He said that Alexander was the son of Philip and not of Zeus. He was a man, not a god. The two men began to shout at each other. Some of the guests hurried Clytus off the tent, but he came back. In a rage, Alexander grabbed a spear from a god and killed his friend. Afterward, the king was filled with guilt and grief. He shut himself in the tent. He would see no one. He refused to eat or drink. This went on for 3 days. Alexander's officers were worried. They sent a message to the king. They said that the king was right and Clytus was wrong. Still, Alexander stayed in his tent. His friends persuaded Alexander to start eating. Everyone hoped that now all would be well. But the men wondered, would Alexander be his old self again? Alexander did seem more at peace with himself. In the spring of 327 BC, before leaving Afghanistan, he got married. His bride was a daughter of an Afghan chief. Her name was Roxania. It means little star. Roxania was Alexander's first wife. If she had a son, he would be the next king. But she wasn't Macedonian, so the next king would have mixed blood. This, too, made many of his men unhappy. Trouble was brewing for King Alexander. So that was all of chapter 6, and I will see you on chapter 7. Bye bye.